I really love the concept that you talk about also as well to be curious. That's something we talk about here a lot. Something from The Body Keeps the Score. Bessel van der Kolk talks about the concept of ABC, always be curious. And just like when it comes to a situation where we're dealing with something like, okay, why is the person acting this way? As opposed to, oh my gosh, they just acted this way.
I think part of the adaptive challenge there becomes children's development, right, over time, and their needs changing over time, and then like their development as people in terms of like personality, identity, relationships to their peers.
Socially.
Yeah,
Right.
socially, exactly.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Parenting is Easy, said no one ever. I'm your host, Khaled, and I have an awesome, special, and very exciting guest today, someone that I've been looking forward to speaking to for a long time, ever since we first made contact, and for many reasons. But I would say first and foremost, probably one of the books that really inspired me both in my profession and I can also personally and as a parent has been a book we've actually talked about here before. Leadership Without Easy Answers from Ron Hafetz. And we finally got someone that has actually had some experience working with him. Dr. Hiba Khalid is a consultant and a co-founder of Embers Consulting and Coaching, based in New York City. She's also a adaptive leadership course coach, as well as a instructional designer. Previously at Harvard, besides also learning at Harvard as well, and also has been learning under Dr. Hafetz. So, Dr. Hiba, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
So we've had in this podcast so many different people talking about different aspects when it comes to children, from dentists to nursing specialists to feeding specialists, and I think when it comes to leadership, it's probably when it comes to parenting, probably I would say one of the areas we could probably learn the most, but at the same time, something that we've never really talked about here on this podcast. So I want to get right into it over here. And I'm curious, just based on the work that you've done, and when you take that concept and put it into parenting, what are like some of the basic principles from adaptive leadership to help navigate the complexities or uncertainties when it comes to raising children that we can learn in today's world?
It's interesting because when I took the adaptive leadership course as a student, I obviously benefited quite a bit in my professional realm. Like how can I apply these in my professional setting in my career? But actually a lot of it is translatable or can be translated to our personal lives. And I think the concepts really do help improve relationships, whether it's with your spouse or children or your family members, like, or other relationships in your life. And I think some of the foundational stuff that is maybe some of the basics across every realm of our lives is how can we foster more curiosity and empathy in our lives? And how can we understand ourselves better from the inside out in order to see how we show up in the world? So, for example, the first half of the leadership courses that I first took as a student and then taught, and then it are kind of like looking at the outside in. So how are we placed within a system, whether it's like our role within the system and where we place, like if there are different levels to the system, if it's like the macro, meso, or micro level, where are we placed within that system? So we can look at a system, for example, as our household, and all the members of our family as stakeholders within that system, and try to understand their perspectives, because each family member more or less has a role in the family unit, right? And together you make up that whole system. So
can you explain a little bit like what you mean by you said three things: macro, meso, and micro? Can you explain like how would that show up in a family? And then could you give examples for those three things?
Yeah, I haven't thought about it too much in terms of like the family system, but I'll try. So maybe at the micro level, it might be the nuclear family. So it might be like the parents, the children, and that is like the nuclear family might be the micro level. And so it's trying to figure out in this at the micro level, like what's my role and what are the expectations of me within that role? Because within any given role that we give ourselves, these are like things that we step into, right? Whether it's like father, mother, daughter, sister, brother, it's these are roles and there are certain expectations. So when we, um, when I'm in the role of a daughter, for example, my mother expects certain things from me and I expect certain things from her just naturally. Like, I think these are just how we define roles. Um, and then there within each level, I guess there's like authority dynamics. So in parenting, especially at the beginning of life, when kids are so dependent on their parents for survival, there's obviously authority dynamics where the child is looking for their parent to fulfill like the needs in order to for them to survive basically or like
That makes
whether
sense.
yeah. And then the meso system, I guess from there could be the extended family. So who else is in the family outside of our nuclear family? Like grandparents, aunts and uncles, cousins might be all in the meso system. And then the macro system might be like us, our families within our communities. So
Mm.
beyond our family unit or like our family tree, who else is outside of that? And it might be the communities we live in. And then kind of realizing our role within each of those layers and where our impact is within those layers. And that's maybe how I would apply that outside in framework onto family systems. And then there's that inside out is kind of like our inner world and how are we impacting the way we show up based on the identities, loyalties, and our ancestry. Um, and how we show up, whether in any role, like whether it's like our parenting role, our professional role, our social roles, like how are we showing up based on the identities that we hold, the loyalties that we have within our communities, our families, our ancestors, and then what are things that we learn through culture, our ancestry that make us show up in the world in a certain way. So those are things that kind of like impact each of the roles, I guess.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. What I'm sort of picturing is like standing in the middle of the bullseye, and like the closer you get to the middle, the more core you are, and that's how much value you're going to have based on where you are, which I think is what you're saying, and you're going to have a different impact depending on how close to the bullseye you actually are, and they're going to have different roles, and I guess different people depending on their cultures and what their values are will have different levels of people and different areas of where community stands, where extended family stands, and obviously within the family roles itself, and knowing the people themselves or where they are or where they're supposed to be, that also comes into play. I like the visual that you're setting up, but also, realizing that there are connections and the connections vary. And I think it's important for a person to realize that it's really depending on what situation it is right now to know what the connection is going to be, and that could change, and there could be different layers or boundaries for each person in each situation that they're in, and if they move, or if there's a life change, or God forbid an accident or something, that obviously comes into play regarding where the roles of each person is going to be, which I guess, like you're saying, is similar to a leadership role regarding knowing, if let's say there's a supervisor that is sick or is extended leave. So someone from the higher ups might have to go ahead and be connected in a certain way. And I think in the roles of a family or community, it works the same way. Like depending on what the situation is, where people have to step up and go to the next closer boundary or cross that boundary, so to speak, where they have to go and be connected or affiliated in some way, which I really like. I really love the concept that you talk about also as well of to be curious. That's something we talk about here a lot. Something from The Body Keeps the Score. Bessel van der Kolk talks about the concept of ABC, always be curious. And just like when it comes to a situation when we're dealing with something like, okay, why is the person acting this way, as opposed to, oh my gosh, they just acted this way. So when we're curious, and instead of being judgmental, I think that it really opens up how we're going to view something, and it's no different when it comes to the family roles, as opposed to it being just not as a specific, like, why is my kid throwing a tantrum, but like, what's the role that I play over here, and how I'm going to be dealing with something is going to be different today than it is in a more dire type situation for whatever the family situation is. So I think it's just like, keeping your eyes and ears and heart open and knowing how to deal with things. I do like the way you're framing it, I think, to sort of give that visual for what the dynamics are in that sense. What do you think the key differences are when it comes to the technical challenges of parenting? Let's say like setting routines and like schedules and stuff, and like the adaptive challenges, like um, teen rebellion or a teen trying to learn agency. And how should parents approach each type of challenge differently?
Mm. Yeah. So, um, do you want me to define like, or people are familiar with technical versus adaptive?
Well, I think that's actually, thank you. Yes, if you don't mind, please first explaining. Obviously, I'm coming from a place of understanding a lot of stuff when it comes to the leadership roles. But if you don't mind first explaining it for people listening, and then sort of taking it from there.
Yeah, so a technical challenge is usually requires expertise to solve. So it usually has a clear solution, whether or not that solution, it might still be a difficult technical challenge and the solution might be difficult to implement, but it has a clear solution and requires expertise to solve that particular challenge. For example, um, if uh, this is the first example that's coming to mind, so I'll just share it. For example, if our car breaks down and we see on the dashboard that it's like the engine is the engine lights on, we know that we're going to take that car to a mechanic who has the technical expertise to fix the engine or to figure out where in the engine there's a problem. And then they could fix that. Like it might be a difficult problem to solve. The engine issue might be a little more complex, but there's a clear solution that it's the engine that's wrong and we might need to like fix the engine or replace the engine. And that requires an expert to do that because not any random person on the street can fix a car engine. So we take it to a very specific expert to fix that problem. However, uh, if you have a flat tire um, and you're driving along the road, you go and to a shop and like replace your tire or put more air in it, and then week after week you keep getting a flat tire. Then you start to wonder actually like, okay, I'm applying a technical fix to maybe a more adaptive problem, and an adaptive problem are more complex and a bit more nuanced, and it requires a lot of learning. So, in order to actually come to a solution or an experiment to try, you have to have like diagnostic integrity. So, you have to really ask a lot of questions and learn more about the problem. So, it requires a lot of learning rather than having a one set solution. And then it doesn't actually require expertise. It requires the stakeholders to come together and realize what the problem is. So, if
It
you
sounds like
did
a lot of patience as well.
yeah, exactly. It takes a lot of patience, requires a lot of learning, and requires a lot of experimentation. So the experimentation is the solution usually. And
Right.
so, for example, you might be having a flat tire because when you do a little bit more investigation and kind of learn more about the problem, you realize there's potholes in the road. And then you realize, okay, there's a pothole. I keep driving over it and it keeps flooding my tire or whatever it is. And then so you're like, okay, let's go fix the pothole. And then you do a bit more investigation and realize actually the city doesn't have enough money to fix this pothole. And then you do a little more investigation and you say, like, why doesn't the city have more money? And then you realize that like the local government just doesn't have enough to allocate to roads. And then you can take it a step further and find out like why isn't the local government getting enough money and take it to the next level, which is like the meso level, that maybe like the provincial or state government hasn't given a like particular town or city like funding for this. And then you can take it further to the federal level and then realize like, you know what I mean? It's just like there are multiple layers and there could be multiple reasons why this is a problem. So it requires a lot of learning and really speaking to all the stakeholders because it's not just about the car owner at this point. It's like about them, the government, the local government, the state government, the federal government. So that's kind of like the difference between a technical problem or challenge that has like a very clear solution and requires expertise and a adaptive challenge that requires a lot of learning and requires a lot of the stakeholders to be a part of the solution. So back to your
That
question.
makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, what was your original question now that I've given the definition?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for that. So I'll just ask it
Thank
again
you.
regarding the how this apply to like to parenting. So let's say you have like a technical challenge in parenting. Let's say, for example, like setting routines and
Mhm.
scheduling and stuff. And then
Yeah.
we have adaptive challenges like
Yes.
navigating teen rebellion slash agency. How should parents approach each type of challenge differently?
Mhm. Yeah, it can be tricky, right? Because often there are components of technical and adaptive challenges within the same challenge. So there might be um, like setting a routine for a teenager, and it might be that, they have to go to school Monday to Friday from 9 to 3:30 or whatever. And okay, so that is like the routine is that they need to be up by 8, have their breakfast, get on the bus, go to school, and then like do their school day and then come home. And there's like technical components to getting your child to school in that sense. And that's part of the routine. And then trying to enforce a routine. What happens when they come home from school? What time do they go to bed? And then I think part of the adaptive challenge there becomes children's development, right, over time and their needs changing over time. And then like uh, their development as people in terms of like personality, identity, relationships to their peers.
Socially,
Yeah,
right?
socially, exactly. And that changes. As we all know, we've all been through all of these stages of development. We're not the same person we were when we were teens. We're not the same people we were when we were children. Um, and there's like the like biological components of development, like how our brains change and like what our needs are at certain stages of our lives. For example, I don't know if you've read the book Why We Sleep by Matt Walker.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I love that book. And I remember reading this section about like why teenagers stay up late. Like why do they stay up
Fascinating.
late and sleep in all the time? But actually it's part of their development. Like that's kind of just a normal part of how they develop as teenagers. And
Sure. I think if I remember correctly, and please correct me if I'm wrong, doctor, but one of the things he talks about is the actual melatonin in the body of a teenager doesn't actually come out or go into the body until later in the day in
yeah,
general.
exactly.
So, for I think for someone that could be of middle age that they're ready to go to bed before their kids sometimes, because of the melatonin already being in the system for a teenager, it could be 2, 3 hours later. So it's just something for us, parents of teenagers, to realize is that yeah, our kids are staying up late, and it's also normal for them to stay up late. But thank you for bringing
Exactly.
to that point.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. So it's just trying to understand, I think, like if we look at the like raising kids from in an adaptive like leadership kind of way, it's like trying to understand like maybe what is the normal like developmental process of a child over time and and like what are we trying to fit them into like our societal norms versus what's their like biological or physiological norms. And are
right.
we so is the if there's like a disagreement or a tantrum or whatever you want to call it between the parents and the child, is it like is it something that is kind of like biological, physiological, and that's why they're not sticking to the routine, or or is it part of their like social development and like trying to yeah have autonomy, like create identities, um trying to kind of become the person that they personally want to become, and then trying to really, I think, partnering with kids instead of, especially as they become more autonomous, partnering with them to understand them as people and not just as someone who is my child and I must protect them and give them order and direction all the time,
Love
which,
it. I think what you're saying is we have to be careful not to parent the child for what I think, but parent the child for what they need.
yeah,
And I think that's basically what you're saying, which is in a way in line with where I was going next with the questioning is, what is the balance? How can parents strike that balance between providing the guidance and also fostering independence in their children, especially when we talk about these adaptive challenges that require them to go ahead and take a step back and allow their children to learn from their own experiences. So, like, what are some like techniques or some tricks maybe that parents can learn or maybe keep in mind?
Yeah, balance between like, sorry, balance between like autonomy and
We
allowing.
got like providing the guidance and also fostering independence,
Right, yeah.
agency.
It's so hard, right? Because um again, I'm not a parent myself, but I have a lot of nieces and nephews and I've seen them grow up across the developmental scale. Um and it's so hard because when they're babies, obviously they need your full attention, and like you need to give them order and protection and direction, right? And then I remember very distinctly my my little niece who's now 6.5. When she was like maybe like 2.5, 3, she just started wanting to do things for herself a lot more. And obviously sometimes it was like she's not aware of some of the dangers or some of the risks that she's taking because she's not like she hasn't been exposed to it enough times to like realize like, oh, if I step on a stepping stool and I'm trying to wash the dishes and I lose my balance, I might fall off, or whatever. So um yeah, I guess there's a balance depending on their age and stage, like whether like kind of loosening the grip on the trying to direct them too much and allowing them to like develop that autonomy for themselves, and then also guiding them to um assess risk for themselves, right? Where it's like um and it's so hard, right? When you're parents and you want to protect your children, like their safety is kind of like top of mind. It can feel scary to let go of the control a little bit and like allow the child to kind of be more independent when you're trying to develop trust between their ability to stay safe and um their ability to like make good decisions for themselves, right? Um
Right.
so it can be like a very difficult thing to balance, but um I think I think one thing that I'm realizing more and more, because we do coach, I do coach a bunch of parents. And one thing that I'm realizing more and more, and also from my own experience, having healed some of the maybe earlier traumas and things that I've experienced through my life, is a lot of times, um, maybe parents are unaware of some of their unprocessed like traumas or things that they have experienced as children. And a lot of the way we show up is a lot similar to how we were raised. So we might think that like we're gonna parent in this way because that's how I was parented. And a lot of it is usually like really, really fine. Like there's nothing wrong with the way that we've learned how to parent. But there's like subtle things sometimes that we're like subtle patterns where we're unaware of this affected me in this way. And I think it's the best way to parent because that's how I thought modeled. But I think one of the things that I'm seeing is when when people in general like become aware of some of the patterns that maybe like we're not the that make us more hungry for control or more hungry for like, yeah, I want to say like power and control, how that shows up in parenting and how that can kind of limit some of the independence we're able to give to our children because
Mm.
we have this like exaggerated hunger for control because we want to, and it might be for good reason. It might be because I want to keep my child safe. But then it limits that child's ability to be more independent and autonomous
Right. And growth. Right.
and growth. And then it can also affect things like their ability to trust themselves because they might always feel like they need to have like the guidance of someone else, or they might fear like taking risks because they've been conditioned to like get someone's permission at all times or something, you know? So
That's
it
a very
does
good point.
have like an impact. So I think one thing that I would say is like it's important to just be introspective and aware like some of the ways that things might manifest in your child's life because of maybe unprocessed things in your own life from a younger age.
I think that's very wise advice, and I think that could go a very long way. You mentioned something I'm curious to give a little bit of clarity on. Is there a difference between control and power, both in the workplace, and then how that would show up within parenting?
Uh-huh. So when like the hunger for control and power are both very normal hungers, right? Like most of us want to feel like we're in control of our lives, and most of us want to have some like power. I think power can have like a negative connotation. We think of like people with power who might like use it for bad, for evil, or like
Mm.
to control other people. Um, I think the hunger for control, when it's exaggerated, it comes from for two reasons. One is like you either grew up in a household that was or have had experiences where things are extremely structured and are kind of like we need to keep things in order. Um, or you might have come from a household or life experience that was completely chaotic. So I think either one of those extremes where like you've seen modeling of extreme structure. So for example, that can happen for people who are in the military, who have like military jobs. And, you know, we all know we've seen enough movies or have known people who worked in military where they're like the sergeant drills and things like that. Like it's so structured and there's like a very structured routine. So then to veer away from that um, can cause tension within ourselves because we're like so used to
Yeah,
that kind of level of structure. The other
sure.
time where we feel like we need to like grasp for control and there's like an extreme desire for control is when we grew up in around chaos or had experiences in our lives that were completely chaotic because then it feels so out of control that we are like we don't ever want to experience that again, so we're going to try and like micromanage our whole lives or like over control things. And then with power, I think it can be like um it can be for different reasons. It might be because there's like a it it might be because of control, like I need to have power in order to control X, Y, and Z. Or it actually might be because of significance, this feeling of wanting to feel significant. Like if I have this status or this role, then I will be in a position of power and like that might give me some significance, you know? Um but yeah, I think they are all kind of interrelated.
Yeah, and I think when we stay curious, I think then we can sort of see the difference within ourselves when we're looking for the power and which has a negative connection to it, or when it's about control, whether it's for safety or for behavioral or for cultural or religious reasons of wanting to implement certain things within that family dynamic. And going back to what you were just talking about before regarding past experiences and how that manifests itself, I'm curious, like what advice or what direction would you give to parents who are struggling with that balance of their own adaptive challenges with those of their children, whether it's career changes, a move, divorce, or like health issues or something like that?
Yeah, it's so difficult, right? I think parents have the hardest job in the world because um the role is so dynamic and they have so much responsibility on their shoulders. So, like, I have some clients who are parents who are navigating their own internal worlds. Like, um, specifically, I've seen multiple um, parents who are like have anxiety, for example, and this is something new that's like come up for them in the last couple of years because you know, they have kind of come off the autopilot of like these are like their kids are not old enough that they've had time to examine themselves or time to spend with themselves, where it's not like, okay, I gotta wake up the kids, make their breakfast, take them to school, um, pick them up, take them to basketball practice, and all this stuff. Like that autopilot cycle was interrupted. And then now they're just like reckoning with some of their own issues or like challenges that they haven't faced because they've just kind of suppressed, and they're dealing with anxiety. And then their kids are also like starting to get bullied at school or starting to experience some challenges at school, and then having to hold themselves through their own process and own feelings, and then also having to nurture their child, and manage still the responsibility of having to do school drop-offs, making lunches, like bringing them.
Life doesn't stop.
Exactly, and it's so difficult. But what I would
Yep.
say is, it's so important. It's so important to put your oxygen mask on first, because when we, as people in general, whether you're a parent or not, when we take care of ourselves first and put our needs ahead of our families, which I know can be so, so hard for parents when their kids are above everything else, um, we show up in the world in a much more fulfilling, sorry, not fulfilling, but much more fulfilled, and are able to make a bigger impact in whatever role were in. So if, and this is one thing I do with my clients, is I just try and ground them back to their like sense of joy, to their sense of groundedness. So what did you actually love doing as a kid yourself that brought you so much joy? Because for me, like joy is the antidote to burnout. And I see a lot of burnout in parents because they're just so overwhelmed and overcommitted, and just have so much on their plate. So then we try to connect with small, like aspects of your own joy, from things that you did in childhood, or um, yeah, in terms of like being able to really take care of yourself first. Like my business partner has two kids, and she gets up early in the morning to go. She has like toddlers; they're quite young. Um, but she gets up like at 5:30 in the morning, goes for a run. She's training for a marathon at the moment. And by the time she's back, she's able, like, then the kids are up and they'll have breakfast together, and then she'll do the school run and everything. But for her, it's like a priority to make sure that
Self
her,
care.
yeah, to make sure that she's good so that she can show up in a more, um, yeah, so she can show up for her kids like differently, and to have the energy to like be with young kids and to play with them and to like really be present with them. So I think it's really important just to remember as parents, like, of course, our children are like the most important people in our lives, but how can we actually make that experience for both us and them more fulfilling? And that starts with like, how do I take care of my needs first? And then so that I'm able to hold more of their needs and show up for their needs in a more full way.
Right there goes you're going back to that be curious, just to ask yourself the question. And I'm a big believer in the concept of I think questions sometimes could be a lot more important than the answer itself, because I think
Mhm.
it brings about a certain awareness of a given situation. But I think the topic you're talking about regarding burnout, I'm glad you went there, because that was an area that I sort of wanted to talk about it for a little bit. When a parent is starting to see some signs of burnout, whether it's in themselves or their children, what strategies can we do just to sort of make sure that we don't fall into that place
Mhm.
of that burnout and going to those negative realms of parenting?
Yeah. I guess parenting is like no one size fits all. Like there are different kinds of parents, like, and everyone has a different situation in terms of like the level of help that's available to them. Um, so we've got like single parents who have different challenges than two parent households with different challenges than um, parents who have like grandparents nearby, or and it depends on like our social sorry, our financial situation also. Can we afford to take our kids to daycare versus can we not afford to do that? So what I would say, like, but for maybe everybody, regardless of your like your situation, um, I think one of the tips to avoid burnout, again, this is going to sound like a broken record, is how can you prioritize at least one activity per day, um, just to you, whether it's like you like to go for walks and you just make sure that you get out for a lunchtime walk or wake up earlier and go for a walk. You like to do like meditation. How can you find time like not not wait for the moment to arrive, but actually intentionally create moments where you're able to engage in those activities that you enjoy.
Mhm.
Even just
Are
for
there things that we can do to recognize that burnout, whether it's
uh
in ourselves or kids?
yeah, I would ask you like I think just kind of back to the curiosity. We can be curious with other people, but we can be also be curious with ourselves. So just start like I always when I feel like some of the things I do now as an adult, I learned as a child. And then we kind of forgot how to do that. And then we go back to like being like children again because we're like, oh, we need to ask ourselves, like, why am I hungry? Or like, why am I angry? Why am I sad? Why am I like, how can we be a bit more curious with ourselves and emotions? So when you're feeling like more and more irritable, irritability is actually one of the earlier signs of burnout. So if we're feeling
Yeah.
like irritable, it's usually because we have a reduced capacity to like withstand the pressure that's coming our way. So it might be that you're noticing that you're becoming more and more
I've
irritable
heard.
and that your fuse is shorter. So then get curious
um,
with yourself, like, okay, what's going on with me? Why is everything annoying me or why is everything frustrating me? Is there something else going on that I'm not seeing? So one of the top things that Ron Heifetz talks about in leadership is is like we're often on the dance floor. I don't know if you saw the dance floor balcony analogy, but when we're on the dance floor, we have a narrower perspective of what's happening. We can only see what's happening immediately around us. So imagine you're on a dance floor. You can see the people around you dancing, but you can't see the whole room. So sometimes to zoom out and like increase our perspective, we go out onto the balcony and then we have a like bigger view of what's happening around us. So when we're like just start taking notice of like, am I more irritable than usual? Am I getting more cynical? Cynicism is one of the biggest predictors of burnout. And am I becoming more cynical? Okay, maybe it's time for me to move from the dance floor to the balcony. What's actually happening? What's going on? And you might notice actually like, oh, I have a lot more, like I have a lot of pressure at work and my workload has just increased tenfold. And there's a lot of stuff going on at work. And now I'm finding myself like becoming irritable at home. And that's like bleeding over. Okay, I need to maybe ask for help at work or delegate more tasks so that I can relieve some of that pressure so that I'm not bringing it home. And then whatever it is, if you notice you're more cynical, if you notice that you're exhausted all the time, if you feel a bit disengaged or that you're like feeling more um like so one of the symptoms that people come to me with is I'm not interested in doing anything anymore. Like I don't want to see my friends on the weekends. I don't find anything interesting. So again, just like when that happens, like start getting curious. I think another thing is to find people who love you so much, regardless of who you are, like whether you're the parents, the son, the daughter, and who will be your confidant so that you can actually go to them and say, like, hey, I'm struggling or I'm finding X, Y, and Z, I need help, or can you help me even just like see more? So I have friends who I will contact and say, like, hey, is there something I'm not seeing? Like, this is
Mm.
what I'm going through. Is there something I'm not seeing? And then they're able to help challenge me to see more. So, like, I've identified those people, and I think it's really important for everyone to really identify who your people are. And then we're going to hold you through times when you're struggling a little bit more.
Okay, so I was that was really where I was going with my next and like final question for right now. But I guess along those lines, how can a parent communicate to, whether it's a co-parent or one of those friends, that they're experiencing some sort of burnout and they need assistance? What would
Mhm.
be some keys for us?
You know what's funny is usually the spouse or the partner will notice the burnout before the person. So, like, what usually happens is I have the partner of someone come to me and say, actually, like, my husband is so burnt out and he doesn't even realize it because he's on autopilot. Or my wife is like working so much. I'm really worried about her. And so usually the partner or co-parent will notice before the person who's actually like experiencing the symptoms, because they're more on the balcony than the person on the dance floor, so they could see more and they notice like, oh, they went from being like really joyful to just cynical, or you know what I mean. So um but I do what I would say then is, if your partner or family member or anybody that you feel close to says to you like, "Hey, are you okay? I've noticed that you are like, are you okay? Is there anything I can do to help?" I think sometimes we tend to be defensive or tend to reject help because we feel a lot of people struggle with accepting help. They don't mind giving it; they love giving it. It's just struggle with accepting help. If someone is coming to you who loves you, says to you like, "Hey, is everything okay? I'm worried about you." Just take a moment to like really hear them out and see if there is actually like, okay, let me sit with myself for a second and see like, is there something wrong and how can I ask for help, or um how can I be vulnerable in this moment to allow
Thing.
someone to see me in this way and then to help me get out of this.
Yeah, I love that. That's amazing. And what I like to when I in my office, the way I like talking about that, and I have a sign as well. It says, "Make a U-turn,"
Mm.
and go inside. And when you're able to ask yourself that question, or and if someone's lucky enough to have that type of partner or friend that will constructively criticize in a certain way regarding, hey, like for what's been happening, I think that that can go really really far, and I think that's I think a very wise way, and hopefully that's something that all of us parents can have in a partner or in a parent ourselves, when our parents might see us, or a sibling, the way we might parent in a certain way. And there's so many more things obviously I'd like to to talk about over here, but I think this has been so helpful, and it's so very very specific guidance given regarding the leadership roles and how obviously that comes to play regarding parenting here. I like ending in some rapid fire questions here, and I'm curious to hear from you. Uh, one personal thing, and then we'll go like a little more a little more vague and like out of the box here. Biggest pet peeve that you have?
Ugh. Um, Biggest pet peeve. This is not so rapid fire. I'm having to think about it. um, that's a hard one. I think okay. One of the things, because I'm so busy right now with entrepreneurship, when you make plans with somebody, whether it's like a meeting or um plans with friends, and they like opt out last second, like the last minute thing without warning.
Oh,
So
100%. Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, yeah. Oh, God, I could so relate to that. Would there be a book or a podcast or maybe a video or something that you would recommend? Something that we haven't talked here on the podcast. Ron, we've talked about sleeping. We've talked a little bit about. I'm curious if there's anything else you would recommend based on our conversation today for our listeners.
I read a book a few months ago called The Big Leap.
The Big
Um,
Leap. Okay.
I forget who it's by, but it's called The Big Leap, and it talks about kind of the like our zone of genius. So we often um have it, like everybody has a zone of genius, and I think he also talks about the zone of excellence. But most of us operate like most of us don't operate within our zone of genius, and we sometimes tend to self-sabotage when things seem too good to be true. So it talks about just kind of like how can we reconnect with that part of ourselves where we're like allowing ourselves to go into our zone of genius and follow the gifts that we naturally have. And when
Mm.
we are,
Was that Gay Hendricks?
yes, that's who it is. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So we will post a link for that in the show notes over here. My last question for you: if you can think of a mundane, everyday superpower that would be beneficial as in your current job as a consultant, or maybe one day as a parent, what would that be?
For me, it's meditation. Like if I were to, I know it sounds, yeah, I think meditation has been my most life-changing habit in terms of even just taking 5 minutes at the start of my day and at the end of my day to quiet my mind and just before I start doing anything, just to center myself. And
Beautiful.
I feel like it's the one habit of mine that can bring me back to a more peaceful state very quickly. Not all the time, not every time, but most of the time I can recenter myself and get back into a peaceful state
Like,
quickly. So I think meditation has been that's the one thing that I feel like has made me the most powerful in some sense because it has allowed me to ground myself in moments of stress, and it
yeah,
doesn't take long. Like you don't have to meditate for 45 minutes or, have a meditation mat and an altar and things like that. You can just do it wherever you are. It's just how do we bring ourselves back to the present moment and reground ourselves away from the ruminating on the past and worrying about the future. So that
yeah,
would be the
love it.
one thing that like I would say is the most helpful.
Okay, well, noted. I think that's something that we can all use. Dr. Hiba, I cannot thank you enough. This has been an absolute honor and pleasure. And hopefully we get a chance to continue this chat because I still have about 20 questions I haven't asked you, but one day maybe we'll get a chance to actually do that. But thank you so much for today.
Thank you so much.